All right, so you were at the combine, and I don't know. Give me the biggest winners, maybe biggest losers. Whose stock changed the most?
Probably Anthony Richardson, because when you see someone in person, it changes your opinion of him, even though he's still the same football player he was during the fall. He's every bit of 6'4". I think he weighed over 230, maybe 235. I have to look at the numbers. Then he ran a 4.4. And you see him throw the football live, and that sort of changes your opinion. It shouldn't, but I think he was a winner. He was all the quarterbacks. He, C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young were all great to talk to in person. Will Levis had a little edge to him, but that's probably because he'd been answering questions all week from teams about why his season went the way it went. And he was honest. He didn't make excuses. He had injuries, and he talked about some of those, and he didn't say it, but the reality is that they had a new offensive coordinator. The offensive linemen, 3 of those guys left to go to the NFL. The wide receivers were for the most part freshmen, so on and so forth. And now you have to do the math and figure out which one of these guys is likely to be the best. It's still Bryce Young for me, even though he's my size. He weighed 204, but that ain't a legit Ryan Wilson 204. That's a guy who chugged 3 gallons of water before he got on the scales 204. He's not going to play at that weight. He's 5'10" and an eighth, I think is what he came in at. But he's special. The problem is that he's 5'10" and an eighth, and there's not one quarterback on planet Earth that was a top 5 pick that was that height. Kyler weighed more, and he's thicker than Bryce, but I think Bryce is a special football player, and if I'm a team at the top, I would take him first. We'll see how that goes.
I'm going to let Heath and Jamie ask you some questions, but can you rank the top 4 quarterbacks? How do you rank them? Bryce Young 1, and then what?
Yeah, I'll give you the top 5 because we talked to Hendon Hooker as well. 1 is Bryce, 2 is C.J. Stroud, who's a good football player that no one's talking about because there's really nothing controversial about him. 3 is Anthony Richardson for me. Some people have Will Levis ahead of him, then Will Levis, and then Hendon Hooker, who's 25 and he's coming off an ACL, so he wasn't able to do anything here or at the Senior Bowl, but he's a great young man. I said, by the way, quickly, Jamie made fun of me during their time in the combine because I was always refer to the players by their full name. So what is Anthony Richardson going to do to get better? My new thing, apparently, Jamie, is saying young man. And in one in the A block of one of the shows we did, I said it 17 times, apparently. So I now say young man a lot. He's a great person, Hendon Hooker. The age is an issue. The ACL less so. But his teammates couldn't speak highly enough of him as a leader and obviously the way he played during the season. But those are my top 5.
So do you think any of those top 4 get out of the top 5 picks? You think Richardson made himself a top 5 pick?
I think the top 9 is probably the max, Heath. But what it's going to happen, unlike last year, they're going to be the teams who are trading up for quarterbacks. Right. It starts at the top with the Bears, right? They're not going to – I don't think they're going to stay put unless something drastic happens. And if they can trade down and get a ton of picks for Justin Fields and helping that team, that'll happen. And then the question becomes, how far does Houston move it to? And then the Colts are at 4, and then the 7 are the Raiders, then 9 are the Panthers. And then, I mean, you go as far as 19 with the Buccaneers. Are they thinking about moving up? They don't have a lot in the way of salary cap space or draft capital, so that may limit them. But I think there are going to be a lot of teams that move up inside the top 9. And if it gets inside the top 5, that would be a crazy first hour and a half of the draft, which I'm all for. I don't know if we see that much happen.
Jamie, why don't you ask a question, sir?
Well, you said Richardson's 3rd for you. He's clearly flying up the draft board. You know, when you look at draft odds of who's going to go first, and, you know, people like to gamble on those type of things. Could you see a situation where a team just falls in love with him and takes him ahead of Bryce Young and ahead of C.J. Stroud?
Yeah, but it feels like a long shot. Like I had teams tell me in January that C.J. Stroud will be in the mix for quarterback 1. The problem with I had a team tell me straight up that, and they weren't being jerky, they were being honest. They said, we could see Anthony Richardson in 5 years being a really good quarterback. Or if you told me he was an amazing tight end, like sort of like Logan Thomas wasn't the quarterback coming out of college that Anthony is, they'd be like, I could see that too, because there's so much uncertainty. I mean, Jamie, you know, you're a Florida guy. Yeah. He threw fewer than 70 passes 2 years ago when Emory Jones was still there. And he told us on the set, he said, the Utah game last year, the first game of the season, he was the best player in the country. And then he had some rough spots. And he said, I was just trying to do too much. I was trying to play too much hero ball because, and you'll find this easy to believe, he said, I've always been the biggest and fastest kid on the field, so I could do whatever I want. And then once the talent level started evening out, it became a little more difficult. Bryce Young is the safest for me, but back in the fall, a general manager said, listen, how many quarterbacks in the NFL look like Bryce Young? How many look like Will Levis? And that's where they're coming from, because unlike me, where I can say things and not necessarily get fired for those specific things. Guys are getting fired if you draft the wrong quarterback. So I think certainly Anthony Richardson's in the mix. And once the owners get involved and the coaches get involved in the sort of scouting process that's been ongoing for months now for the personnel department, then things also get even more interesting. I think like the perfect landing spot for Anthony Richardson, actually for any quarterback on planet Earth, is San Francisco, but that's not going to happen. But after that, the landing spot matters a lot because you could put Patrick Mahomes in Cleveland out of that draft, and he's probably not the same person he is now.
Yeah, and Richardson doesn't have to come in and play as a rookie. He's a really interesting prospect for those of you who don't know. His completion percentage really like extremely inaccurate quarterback. And some notes from our CBS Sports research crew. 24 career touchdown passes would be the fewest by a first-round pick quarterback since Michael Vick in 2001. And 55% completion percentage in college in his career would be the lowest by a first-round pick quarterback since Jake Locker in 2011. So there's that, but then he just had basically the best combine that a quarterback's ever had in terms of the testing and all of the athletic stuff. He's an unbelievable athlete, so he's very interesting. We could talk about him forever, but I think people want to talk about Bijan Robinson on this podcast here, right? So Bijan Robinson, what did you think? Was he as impressive as you were hoping, and where do you think he gets drafted?
Yeah, no, he was. I was sort of interested. I was surprised that he wasn't 6 feet even. Saquon actually measured taller. Saquon doesn't feel that tall to me, maybe because he's so well proportioned and more importantly so thick. But Bijan is a similar type player to that. I know on the broadcast, on the NFL Network broadcast, they had comps to Marshawn Lynch, but Marshawn ran I think a 4.57 and Bijan got a sub 4.5. He's a special player. And the issue becomes, does he go in the first round? Not because he's not a top 10 talent, and he is a top 10 talent. The issue is there a team that will take him in the first round because this running backs class is so deep? And once you get towards the bottom, and if a team like the Chiefs or the Eagles decide to take a flyer on him, that would be interesting. The Chiefs have Isaiah Pacheco, and the things didn't work out with Clyde Edwards-Helaire a few years ago. Maybe even the Bills could be in the running that took James Cook last year in the second round. And I know that has implications fantasy-wise that aren't the same as sort of NFL Sunday-wise, but it would be a situation for him where he doesn't have to carry the load and get all the tread worn off the tires, whatever the cliche you want to use, and be in a system where he's going to have success. He's also fantastic as a receiver. He's a really good blocker. And Adam, I'll mention one name quickly. His teammate, Roschon Johnson, actually was taller than he was. He ran a 4.58. But he is an incredible special teams talent, both on coverage and as a returner. He's maybe one of the best blockers in this league, coming into this class, I should say. And he hasn't taken a lot of snaps, and he is going to be a RB1. So you guys can get ahead of the curve and put him on your list because, like Brian Robinson last year, right? He waited his time at Alabama, came out, and was drafted higher than many people, myself included, thought. So Bijan's special, there's no doubt about it. But Roschon Johnson is a name to keep an eye on as someone who is going to play a lot of football next year and do a lot of really good things.
Yeah, like everybody is so excited about having that 101 in a rookie dynasty draft because they get Bijan. But how big do you think the gap is between him and everyone else at running back? I know that it's a deep class, but what's that second tier look like?
Jahmyr Gibbs out of Alabama by way of Georgia Tech. They're neck and neck in my mind. People don't want to hear that, and that's fine. Bijan's bigger. Jahmyr's a little smaller. But Jahmyr compared himself to Christian McCaffrey, and most folks, myself included, compared him to Alvin Kamara or Dalvin Cook. That's the type of player he is. That's how dynamic he is, and he does a lot of things well. So if you told me that Bijan went 5 or 6 picks ahead of Jahmyr, or even in the right situation, Jahmyr went ahead of Bijan, it wouldn't surprise me. And there are a lot of backs like Jahmyr that are not 220 pounds, but are incredibly shifty, will help you in the pass game. Tyjae Spears, for example, out of Tulane. Devon Achane out of Texas A&M. He came in at 188. He runs between the tackles as hard as anyone, and he does it effectively, and you're not going to catch him. And again, he has return ability. Zach Charbonnet is actually one of the few guys who was sort of big, 6 feet, 214. So it feels like almost he's like 2 years ago when Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, all those guys went clustered in the second round. We're going to see that after Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson, in whatever order they go off the board. They're going to be a run of guys in round 2 that are going to be contributors immediately. And again, at the top of that list for me is Roschon Johnson and the second tier of guys who has a chance to be a really good football player really early.
Ryan, you mentioned the size of some of these guys, and I think some people have concerns about can they be workhorse running backs? You know, they could be the Alvin Kamara types, but those seem to be a little bit more rare in the NFL to be that good. And so, do these guys with some of these slight frames concern you a little bit that they're just going to be more complementary backs as opposed to lead backs?
Yeah, that's a fair concern. And I mean, even how often these days are these guys feature backs, right? You have, I mean, Dalvin, and when Dalvin's healthy, he's still taking a few series off for Madison, and Kamara, when he's healthy, I suppose he is sort of the guy, but it feels more and more rare to see that be the case. Saquon is the guy, but he would occasionally take the series here and series there off, in part because he's probably still coming back from the knee injury. But yeah, no, that's a fair concern, and it's a bigger issue for you guys, of course, than for me just sort of watching on Sunday. But I think we saw this with Kenneth Walker or Ken Walker. He still likes to be called Ken, even though we refuse to call him that. And then Breece Hall, before he got hurt, they were getting the carries, and they're not big guys. We right. saw them on the set last year, Jamie. They're both north of 200 pounds. But I think when you're talking about like an A-Chain, like I mentioned, who's 188, maybe that's a concern. He's more of a home run hitter, take a few plays off. You can move him in the slot if you want, and more of a sort of jack of all trades. But that is a fair concern when you're talking about guys that you want to carry the ball 20, 25 times a game.
All right, I know you have to go in a couple minutes, so could you tell us about the wide receivers who really stood out? Who are your top three?
Yeah, so this is interesting, Adam, because this wide receiver class isn't nearly as good as recent classes, and it's sort of weird to say because it's a trickle-up effect from high school where you see these guys and they go to college and they ball out there and then they make their way to the NFL. But there's no – I don't say there's no, but there's not going to be a Jamar Chase. Quentin Johnston's at the top. Jordan Addison's at the top out of USC by way of Pitt. He didn't run a great time. He plays much faster than that. I think Zay Flowers has a chance to end up sneakily being the first wide receiver drafted out of BC. He actually went to the Shrine Bowl, didn't go to the Senior Bowl, and he is a fantastic football player. All three of those guys are. Quentin Johnston's the one that he's 6'3", I think 6'4", and he didn't run, but he runs well when you watch him play. Addison, as I said, is fast on tape, even though he ran a 4.49 or whatever it was. Let's see who else is there. There's I
want to get your thoughts on Jackson Smith-Njigba, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, no.
A year ago, after his 2021 season, I felt like he was going to be a top 5 pick. How much can we just explain the struggles on the injury? Because I do think that fantasy managers, when he gets drafted, a lot of them are going to kind of be thinking what I'm thinking is this guy might just be the best wide receiver and was penalized too harshly by his injury-plagued 2022 season. How are people feeling about Jackson Smith-Njigba out of Ohio State right now?
He had a good workout. He didn't run, but the drill said he did. Otherwise, I think people felt okay about it. And look, he only had a hamstring, so it wasn't the end of the world. I think he only played 3 games, had 5 catches. And I got the sense that he sort of Nick Bosa'd it and shut it down. Nick Bosa had the core muscle injury coming out, and he, after a few weeks, said, I'm good, and no one cared. The concern is that people want to see how fast he is. He plays in the slot primarily, but C.J. Stroud and Garrett Wilson both told us that he was the best wide receiver on that team in 2021. And he led that team in receiving. He led that team in receiving yards. And that group had Olave, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison Jr. might be the number 2 overall pick next year once we get past all the quarterbacks or whenever that happens. So people want to see how fast he runs. If he runs a 4.6, that's a problem. If he runs a 4.49, no one cares. I do wonder, though, sort of we talk about quarterbacks being in systems. If Smith-Njigba needs to have a number 1 next to him, can he be the number 1 going from day one? I don't know if that's the case. But it's also a case, Adam, of what have you seen from me lately? And to your point, we sort of dock guys for not doing something most recently. And I'll mention quickly a guy who has done something recently, Jalen Hyatt, the wide receiver out of Tennessee, played with Hendon Hooker, had what felt like 50 touchdowns last year. He was a backup. He was a number 3, and he got to play because Cedric Tillman, the number 1, got hurt, and all he did was torch Alabama, and he ran a really good time. I think he had a 4.40. He's a big kid, 6 feet, and we talked to him, and he has an edge to him. He wants to get better, and if you're looking for a home run hitter to complement, say, a CeeDee Lamb in Dallas, Jalen Hyatt feels like a really good pick where he doesn't have to do everything. There'll be other guys around him taking some of the pressure off, and he can just I call him Mike Wallace. He can just Mike Wallace it down the field and go routes all night long.